I really appreciate you doing this, Travis. Obviously, this is Travis Anderson. We're recording this. We'll be posting this later this week. Head age group coach of the Edina Swim Club, and a bunch of letters of certifications that he has, which I'm sure he can go through. We're going to talk about functional training. So I will turn it over to Travis, and we can get this thing rolling. Thank you, Travis.
Thanks, JB. All right, so I'll introduce myself quickly. So I'm Travis Anderson. JB said I'm the head age group coach at Edina. But in addition to that, I'm also very, very passionate about strength and conditioning, human movement. So outside of coaching, I've done a lot of diving into the strength and conditioning world and human movement just in general, and seeked out knowledge and certifications through that. So on my own, I've picked up a personal training and corrective exercise specialist certification through the National Academy of Sports Medicine. I'm a level 1 functional movement screen certified through Gray Cook's functional movement screening company. And then I've also done some continuing education through OPEX, which is done by James Fitzgerald. They're big in the CrossFit community. So I've done some of their principles and foundations of coaching, as well as their functional bodybuilding introductory courses, kind of detailing some of the stuff we'll talk about today. So first, wanted to start out with defining what functional training is, because I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding, or it's been misrepresented in a lot of gyms as something that we're gonna do and illustrated in a lot of these ridiculous pictures of people back squatting while they're standing on medicine balls or aerobic balls, or doing a lot of rotation or stability work. And yeah, those things can be really, really cool, but that's not what the foundational principles of functional training or functional movement are. So I wanted to define, when people talk about functional training, or at least when I'm going to talk about it today, we're referring to training and strengthening they call them the 7 basic or primal or functional movement patterns. And those are listed below: your squatting, lunging, pushing, pulling, bending or hinging, twisting, and then gait, or I'll refer to it as locomotion. I kind of expanded those out a little bit because there are other considerations in there, and especially as they relate to full development of an athlete. So in the squat, we talk about regular squatting, which was demonstrated in the previous slide, but we also want to look at overhead squatting, especially for our sport, and I'll show why that's important in the next slide. Lunging. So we have lunging in place, which I refer to as split squatting. There is lunging moving forward and backwards. There's lunging moving laterally, and there's lunging moving transversely. So a little bit of rotating as you're stepping to a direction. Hinging. So this would be your deadlifting, bending over pattern. You can do that bilaterally or unilaterally. Both are important. We'll go into more details as to why. I just want to give everybody kind of basic understanding. Pushing and pulling. So in considerations there, we have to think about pushing in 3 different directions: vertical, horizontal, and downward. We also want to think about doing that bilaterally and unilaterally. So when I refer to that, bilateral means both limbs, unilateral means one limb. Pulling, same idea, but now we're thinking about pulling vertical, upward, or horizontally. In twisting, we talk about rotation, but we actually want to talk about anti-rotation, so your body's ability to stabilize and prevent changes in movement in different directions. And then locomotion, as we talked about on the last slide, so this goes from crawling to walking to running, sprinting, and jumping. I kind of group all of those in together. So in these just 7 basic patterns, there's a lot that we can cover in training, and a lot that we should consider in training. And I want to highlight a couple of areas in swimming that those are actually important. So a couple of slides here of some pictures of movements that we'll all see. I highlighted freestyle as a common one, easy to see, but there are areas that are prevalent in all 4 strokes. So the big one talking about was overhead squatting. This is somebody pushing off for a flip turn, and this is the almost identical movement pattern that you will see for an overhead squat. So getting the body comfortable and strong in this position can have a really good direct translation there. Coming down here for the start, we will see elements of a hinging pattern, bending over. We'll also see elements of that lunge or split squat with feet split and pushing off that front leg. Up here in the initiation of the freestyle catch and pull, we're going to see elements of pushing and pulling in there. Obviously, the vertical and horizontal pulling motion is going to be right here. A little bit of vertical pushing, helping to stabilize the hand overhead, or the muscles that we use in those movements, stabilize the arm overhead. Over here to the right, as we look at the finish of the stroke and beginning of the next one, you can see a little bit of that overhead stability we were talking about, as well as some of that downward pushing. The recovery right here actually illustrates a really good upward pulling motion. So if anyone's ever done upright row in the gym, very, very similar motion with the shoulder being lifted using the up back muscles. Over here, I don't know if we can see it, but this is Phelps setting up a butterfly stroke. But in that, there's actually a lot of elements of anti-rotation. So trying to stabilize the body to prevent any motion side to side. So we have one strong, solid surface to propel ourselves forward off of. And then down here, you got a backstroke swimmer, I think it's Ryan Murphy. So elements of rotation and getting ready to apply force in his backstroke pull, obviously connecting into that rotation for more power and force. So all through here, we can pick out certain elements of where the functional movement patterns or those primal movement patterns are prevalent. But more importantly, I want to talk about why. So why is this something that we should consider? Why would this be something that I should sacrifice some of my water time in practice for? First and foremost, it builds better athletes. So if we have a better athlete, you have someone who is stronger, you have someone who is faster, you have someone who is more durable. So they're able to handle more yardage, more intensity for a longer period of time than someone who is not. And you're also developing a better mind and body connection. So where this kind of comes into play is your ability to coach, give corrections, and the athlete to make that connection and correction faster. Better their mind and body connection is, the quicker you can make changes in water. And then more importantly, we can actually start to help correct any movement dysfunctions. And this is something that JB and I got talking about at Zones. I'm actually starting to see, and I'm sure some of you guys are too, for multiple athletes in multiple age groups, but we're starting to see more and more movement dysfunctions become kind of commonplace. I think that's due to a lack of just general physical preparedness in school, a lack of free play outside, like kids aren't outside, running around at the park, climbing trees, just playing and moving all the time. We're much like this guy up here, we're sitting on computer screens, desks, reading in bad postures, and those bad postures are starting to show at a younger age and become more and more, I don't want to say permanent because they can be corrected, but they're definitely concerning. So some examples that you guys can look for here. We have an overhead squat assessment picture where there's some movement dysfunctions being showcased in the lower body from the front, from the side. So in this one, you can see feet and ankles are collapsing in, which causes the knees to obviously dive inward as well. In this one, feet turning out. This one, just knees collapsing in. In this one, knees bowing out. All those things are not good athletic positions and can lead to injuries if not treated appropriately. From the side, you can see huge curve in the lower lumbar. or rounding of the hips and low back, them not being able to stabilize an upright torso position, or again, not be able to hold an upright torso, but doing it by sacrificing through the middle. So some of these things that would relate to swimming. I've actually seen a lot of breaststroke athletes have this issue right here where feet and ankles collapse in. I think that's a pretty advantageous thing for the water because it gives them a flatter kick, some more surface area to kick off of. But on land, we want to be able to make sure that they have control over that position so that they can be strong in both. I'm seeing a lot of kids that have trouble being athletic in their starts, kind of be here where their hips and tailbone kind of tuck under, like a scared dog, we call it. So again, we're not going to be able to apply maximum amount of force in starts in turns if we're not able to get into a better position here. And then obviously the upright torso issue, if we're pushing off the wall, if we're diving in, that streamline and that neutral position from fingertips to shoulders all the way through to the hips is going to be really, really important for minimizing resistance in the water. So anything that we can do on land to offset those is going to be really, really important. Over here to the right, talked about earlier, this guy over the desk. So you see upper curvature of the rounding of the shoulders and neck, and head protruding way too far forward. Where I'm actually seeing a lot of kids walk around this way, and it scares me. It does. I want to make sure that this is something that we do as much as we can to prevent and or correct, because obviously I think our responsibility as coaches is number one to deliver a really good service to our athletes, but number two, we want to make sure that we keep them injury free as much as possible, and even if that means that we're offsetting stuff that they're doing outside of practice time, I think that that's really important. And then lastly, we have a little curvature of the low back here. It's a lordosis issue. It's called lower cross syndrome. This one's called upper cross syndrome, if you guys want to look at those in more depth. So basically here, super tight low back, hip flexors not being pulled in, core not being tight, leads to this big arch. We'll see a lot of people exaggerate this in streamlining. Not what I think is the most advantageous position for streamline. Yeah, again, we want to try to do everything that we can to offset any dysfunction or correct any dysfunction that we can to help our athletes be better athletes. So that's just a little bit to why those are important, why maybe sacrificing a little bit of water time might lead to some greater results in the water. So let's get into some equipment that you might need. Now, first and foremost, you can train any and all of these with just body weight. So you really don't need any equipment. So if the concern is doing this because we don't have a gym, we don't have pull-up bars, we don't have med ball stretch cords, you just need your body weight. And we can go through, I've got some exercise examples in the slides coming forward, and then we can talk a little bit more in depth where that can happen, but know that all of these things can be trained with just body weight. If you want to spend some money or you have access to these, that's awesome. You can get as fancy as you want, med balls, pull-up bars, gymnastics rings, cords, dumbbells, kettlebells. You can outfit yourself a pretty awesome gym setup for not a very large investment. And I know there have been some, I can't remember which coach put an article out that how they outfitted their Dryland space and did so on a pretty affordable budget with some pretty cool equipment. So there's definitely resources out there available to you if the equipment constraint is your primary concern. So going through some exercise examples of squatting, hinging, and lunging. So air squat, again, body weight example of what we're trying to do. Make sure, again, we get at least parallel, if not below parallel, from the hip crease to the knee. We want to make sure the feet are shoulder width apart, toes can point forward or a little bit out to the side, and that can be different depending upon the shape of your athlete. Your athlete may have different shaped hips and may not be able to point their toes straight forward, and that may be totally okay. You have to have an eye for what you're looking for, and there's definitely, again, resources out there to go through what the points you need to be looking for are, and then obviously using your best judgment as a coach, watching them move. But that's a really good example, again, of the body weight variation of this. You can load this and make it more complex with, again, dumbbells, med balls, barbell, or we can make it easier by having them sit back to a chair, sit back to a couch, sit back to an elevated position. So if you have athletes, going back to that dysfunction slide, whose hips and tailbone tend to tuck under as they bend over here, if you restrict their range of motion to something above parallel where they can have good position and train that, good, do that. Get them stronger and get them more comfortable holding that better position. And then over time, you can progress them to getting to parallel or even below. Split squat here, a demonstration or a lunge in place. Again, you can do this body weight, you can do this loaded with both hands, barbell, the list goes on and on. Big thing to consider here, I like to start static in this position, straight up and down, and it's a really easy thing to teach. Get them into this position on the ground, and then have them stand up, and then have them lower back down. Really, really easy to teach that one and to get it looking the way that it should. You can take this and make it more complex. Obviously, we talked about earlier of moving forward, moving backwards with the lead foot, or going laterally or rotating out to the side as we're stepping in the transverse plane. Hinging here at the bottom. So this is where we're going to look at kind of our deadlift pattern. Very, very similar setup initially to a squat, where the feet are going to be shoulder width apart, toes pointed forward a little bit out to the side. Only difference here is now, instead of controlling our load down and up, we're taking load from down here and bringing it up to our center. So again, load should be starting out pretty light in between the legs. You can progress this, again, dumbbells, light med ball, barbell, obviously. You can actually, again, we talked about restricting range of motion for the squat. You can restrict how low they start in, because this neutral spine position is going to be the most important thing we're working on here, and maintaining that neutral spine position is going to be really, really important. So if they can't get all the way down there here, maybe you put them on an elevated position at or just below the knee and have them go from there. Again, if you can find the proper position we're trying to train, great. And then get them strong there, get them comfortable there, and then progress them down further and further. Excuse me. This is an example over here to the right of the unilateral RDL. So already here we can see a little similarities to the finishing of a start, track start off the block. Again, same thing. If we struggle with maintaining this really good posture with weight, do it without weight, do it with restricted range of motion, do it with whatever you can do to find the position that you want to train, and then get them comfortable there and get them strong there, and then progress them through as appropriate. That's the most important part. Going on to pushing. So we're looking at vertical pushing, horizontal pushing, and downward pushing here. So some examples of vertical pushing, obviously handstand push-ups, very hard example, but it is one. We can take this as also a military press, dumbbell press, really light med ball press. So this is, again, working on strengthening that overhead position that we talk about, and definitely something that as swimmers we need to be very, very strong in, as a lot of our application of force starts in that overhead position. Moving on to horizontal pressing, you got push-ups as an example. Again, you can make this more challenging by elevating your feet. You can make it less challenging by elevating where the hands are. So you can do this up against the wall and press down. You can do this to a chair, to a bench, to something that's a little bit elevated if push-ups are too difficult, or if they're too easy, obviously elevating the feet or adding resistance where appropriate. Dips, again, we talked about the importance here of strengthening the tricep muscles for the finish of the stroke down here. So example there, where feet are in close, you can get the feet out wider as they get stronger. You can also elevate the feet. You can add resistance in the lat. So lots of variations that you can add in there to keep working on either progressing or regressing the athletes as needed. Pulling. So we got vertical pulling here, example being pull-ups. Horizontal pulling, example being the TRX row. Again, this could be stretch cords. This could be a bent over dumbbell row. Again, many examples we can use. And then finally, we have that upright pulling. So the upright row with dumbbells here. Example earlier I showed in swimming was the freestyle recovery. So that high elbow coming out over the water. So something good to help strengthen the shoulder capsule for that range of motion, because obviously we're going to be going through that at a pretty high rate of volume and also high rate of intensity. So we want to make sure that we are protecting that shoulder as much as we can. Again, if pull-ups are too difficult, something in this position, we're working on pulling elbows down and engaging your back muscles, lats, and shoulder blades and all those. I've done this body weight with swimmers partnering up and holding each other's hands. So one standing, one on the ground. So one swimmer's sitting, legs straight. The other one is standing behind them. They grab their partner's arms and they pull down here. Their partner is resisting them by either pulling up or slowing down their pull down. So it's a really good way to start developing that pulling strength if maybe they're not strong enough to do pull-ups. And again, you guys can get super creative here on what variations you use, but those are kind of the general ideas of what we're looking for pulling in those three different directions. So we talked about rotation and anti-rotation, and examples for there, obviously Russian twists, simple one for core in developing rotational strength. You can also do some work with a stretch cord where we're standing straight arm out, and power press is one with rotation. Here we have a basic plank. Again, working on that anti-rotation or stabilizing your body, and preventing any motion laterally, vertically. We want to stabilize, stay straight. You can again make these progressively more difficult as swimmers get better at them, but looking at what are some foundational things that we want to be able to do in the water. Well, we want to be able to rotate with power, but we also want to be able to stabilize where appropriate. So two very important things there. And then finishing out with some examples for locomotion. So examples here being crawling. This is a bear crawl example with hips elevated. We have an example here of running or sprinting, and then an example over here of jumping. So locomotion being important, more so in my opinion, in addition to the strengthening development that it helps with, it also helps with a lot of coordination. So we talked earlier about that mind and body connection. So learning how to do these things with good technique and good connection through your whole body really helps translate into just any sport in general, because the better connected you are, again, the better you can make changes and the better that you can have the technique that we're looking for. I don't know how to say that better. Anyway, training considerations. So things that you guys need to consider before just throwing a Dryland workout at your groups. You want to have some sort of testing and screening. And obviously I have the FMS. I think that it's good. It's something, right? And as long as we have something that we're using to test and screen the athletes and make sure that they're capable of performing whatever movements we're looking for safely and in control, then you're on the right track. And again, you don't have to use that one. You can have one of your own. Every personal training education system has some sort of screen that they will provide you guys. So any and all works as long as you have one and you're using one. That's awesome. There is a physical therapist, strength conditioning coach that I really like named Charlie Weingroff. He has a quote for his testing and screening that he uses, and he says that you want to make sure that your joints can get into the right positions, number one, and that they can maintain the right positions under change. So change being any force applied outside to them or inside to them from your body. So if you ever think, like, what am I looking for? That's what we're looking for. Next thing you want to consider are progressions and regressions. So you want to know how to either progress the athletes forward or regress them backwards, depending upon what you're seeing in your screening. So we showed some of those movement dysfunctions earlier. Obviously, some of those people should not be squatting. Some of those people probably should not be pressing all the way overhead with load. But what can we do to still stimulate that motor pattern? What can we do to still train that movement pattern? So we need to know how to progress and regress, and it could be very individual depending upon the athlete from what you see in your screening. And then finally, we want to talk about, is this training more neurological or is it more physiological? And what I mean by that is being really, really strong is more what I would consider of a neurological skill than a physiological skill. So analogy I've heard that I really, really like in relating those two is, imagine that we are a car and we start with a 4-cylinder engine. Right now, we're running probably 2 cylinders in training, just for example. So 2 ways we can get better. We can either upgrade to a 6-cylinder engine and maybe get a 3rd cylinder running in there, or we can keep our 4 cylinders but learn how to run all 4 correctly. So in that development of your brain and body connection, in that development of the obviously neurological training versus physiological training, you're able to be stronger without necessarily having to change your physiology. So add more muscle, add more mass. So physiological, obviously the opposite of that, where we're actually going to look at changing our body, changing our energy systems, changing how much lean body mass we have. As we look to this, so this would be more example of like bodybuilding, like trying to put on a lot of big muscle. I actually don't think that's the best way to train for our sport, because obviously in the water, we want to create as least resistance as possible while we're swimming. So the more neurologically strong that we could be and the more efficient that we can be, I think the better it applies to being a good swimming athlete. And then I wanted to go through some continuing education resources for you guys, or some at least starting down the rabbit hole of where to look and where to learn. So I think the best resource for swimming specific strength conditioning and just dryland programming in general is the Gambetta Athletic Improvement Network. They have a swimming specific program that Vern Gambetta has developed with Ian Murray and Chris Webb, and those guys have all collaborated to develop this really, really awesome system. And they put on clinics. I got to go to one in Carmel a few years ago. It was very, very well run, and they have a ton of resources there. Vern also has a very, very well-renowned book called Athletic Development. So it talks about youth athletic development and the process and considerations we should be going through there. The next one I recommend is Becoming a Supple Leopard. So this is by Dr. Kelly Starrett. He is very well known in the CrossFit community for basically making mobilizing and stretching commonplace, where it really wasn't in gyms and in strength conditioning for a long time. A lot of people would, do a couple arm swings, do a couple leg swings, and then go lift some heavy weight. And he made it cool and illustrated the importance as to why warming up and mobilizing your joints correctly can actually help improve your performance. So he goes through all of the shapes and movement patterns that you will see, and illustrates what a good position and not good position looks like, and then actually gives a lot of suggestions and recommendations on how to fix yourself. He also has a program that you can sign up for called the Ready State. So it's a app on your phone that can give you access to a daily mobilization. It can give you access to all of their libraries of mobilizations. You also have a course becoming certified in their system of how to teach that. Next one is Movement by Greg Cook. So this is the guy that developed the functional movement screen, the functional capacity screen, live balance test. These are used by lots and lots of strength conditioning coaches, high-level professionals in this area. So this book of movement is really, really important in talking about screening, assessment, and correctives to help with any of the deficiencies you see or that we talked about earlier. Also, some online resources there. The FMS Level 1 is an online course that you can take. They also have the functional capacity screen, which is another online one you can take that details more into athletic movement. Sorry. And then I think that's it for great stuff. Yeah. And then the last one that I actually just stumbled upon recently is the Q Swim app. This is one that's a subscription-based service, so your athletes can sign up for this, but it actually has a movement screen built into it where you take a photo or a video of yourself performing the movement, and it will show you how to assess your results in the video. It compares them to an Olympic swimmer, and I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, showing his range of motions and his results from the test. And you can compare and contrast side by side with your own. And then based on your results in their movement screen, it actually provides correctives. It provides progressions and regressions for exercises based on your results. And it also has some education on what you're doing and why you're doing it. So pretty cheap subscription there, and something that I found to be really, really cool. Just check out. There are some other strength conditioning resources you guys can look at on your own. Obviously, personal training, just in general, if you want to learn how to get a fundamental knowledge of strength training, I would start there. Millions, not millions, but dozens and dozens of resources or places that you can look. I like the National Academy of Sports Medicine, the American Council of Exercise, ACE is also another one that's pretty well renowned. You can also look at, I really like for coaching education, the OPEX system. So they have a coaching certificate program that takes you through assessment, coaching, periodization, programming, everything from a strength conditioning perspective. Related to them, the Brand X method is one that's very similar to that, but specific for development of youth athletes. So something I think is pretty neat that they were able to put that together. And then if you really want to get into strength conditioning, I don't think there's a better well-known certification out there than the CSCS. And that is, I can't remember which company that's with. But yeah, so there is some education resources, tools for you guys to go and look at, start learning, and at least point you in the right directions of what you should be looking at and what you should be looking for, and some ways to help you program, progress, and regress appropriately. So that's really, that's all I had. And then I'll open it up to you guys for questions.
Well, first off, thank you. That was phenomenal. When I had originally asked if you were interested in doing this, this was not what I expected, but this has been absolutely tremendous. And I don't think I've learned quite as much in such a consolidated period of time as I just did now. So thank you so much, Travis. That was phenomenal.
Thank you.
As far as questions, the first thing I would ask is, if I'm a smaller team, I don't have a lot of resources. I don't, maybe it's me and another coach, and we're working with 30 or 40 kids at a crack. Do you have any resources that you recommend, or just basics that you would recommend starting off with to try to establish some form of Dryland training?
Sure. So like I said, the body weight training would be the best thing, because that we all have access to our body weight. And there are plenty of things on the pool deck that can help us as far as chairs or bleachers. So if we need to progress or regress for people that have any movement dysfunctions, we have the option there. I'll tell you, for my kids, we haven't done any loaded Dryland modalities until last week, and we started with some light medicine balls, but up until then we've been doing all body weight work. A lot of it is starting with a good core foundation, and then us also developing coordination, and then developing some basic body weight strength. So developing their ability to do full push-ups, because not all of them can or could. Developing their ability to squat correctly, again, because not all of them can or could. And then getting them strong in those first before we start progressing with adding more load or more intensity. And then there are tons of things that you can do to develop coordination, speed agility drills, jogging, high knees, jumping, list is endless. So yeah, so I would start with body weight. I would do some research as to some body weight training exercises, or the ones that are listed in here. And again, it doesn't have to be a lot, right? You can pick, we're going to do squats and we're going to do push-ups, and I'm going to make sure that everyone can have those good positions that we showcased here earlier. If I see anyone without those good positions, I'm going to address or regress them appropriately to where they can be in a good position and get strong in that good position. Everyone should be doing core work, in my opinion, because both rotation and anti-rotational strength are very, very important in our sport, and especially in a medium of water where we're not always, like, it's different, right? We're not able to be on land and get the same biofeedback that we do in the water. So we need to be able to have that control over our movement. I went in like 5 different directions. So is that
no, that gets to kind of where I'm going to. I mean, you know, I think so much that I think sometimes people, they kind of fall into one of two categories and they don't have a lot of experience. Either A, default to something that maybe they were taught when they were younger, or, you know, maybe they see it being done in another sport, or B, they don't do anything at all because they're afraid of making a mistake. So no, that was great. That cleared some good ideas.
Some other considerations too, if you don't want to spend a lot of time maybe giving up a lot of practice time to truly get strong, I would recommend spending time to get your athletes into the positions, or get their bodies able to be in the positions that we want them to be in the water. So those mobilizations, or there's even like yoga, and some yoga positions are really, really good for helping us strengthen and stabilize similar motions or similar positions that we're going to be in the water. So again, kind of going back to understanding what are the shapes that we're trying to make in our strokes in the water, and can we make those on land with control? And if we can't, then how do we get there?
Travis, I have a question for you in terms of frequency. How much do you think that you should be doing this with maybe a 10 and under versus an 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 and over athlete with a club program? I'm sure it varies, but maybe just some general guidelines.
Sure. So really with your, I'll group probably the 12 and unders separately, because with the age groupers, they're not going to be so much, that's going to be more of that neuromuscular conditioning that we talked about, and that can be done on a virtually daily basis as you guys deem appropriate for your programs. And essentially it's a little bit of structured play that we referred to earlier, is that's kind of missing in our development as youth now. So learning how to crawl and run and jump and climb and roll, like those are all things that you can give to your 12 and unders and just make them better athletes. And you can do that on a daily basis, and it really doesn't take more than probably 10 or 15 minutes on the pool deck. Or if you're going to use it as we talked about, like, if we're not going to use it to train, but we're going to use it to make sure that we have really good positioning before we get into the water to start training, again, 5 or 10 minutes on land of some of these movements or mobilizations can be really, really helpful. As you're getting older and you're going to want to start, or as you start to want to include the actual strengthening portions, I would recommend 2 to 3 times a week of some dedicated time to getting stronger, probably at least 30 minutes. Obviously, that goes up as your training age and ability level goes up. Probably don't have to do more than 3 times a week, I would say, but you definitely want to make sure that you're prioritizing that for the reasons that we talked about earlier, if that's something that you're going to go in on in your program. If you're going to make the time for it, then make the time for it, make it important, and make sure the kids know why it's important.
Thanks.
So we're trying to do a couple things with our Dryland where kids are not really ready to jump into some of the things that we're doing with older kids, especially where we feel that they should be ready to go when practice starts. And so creating a dynamic warm-up that they're expected to come 15 minutes before practice instead of sitting on the bleachers and doing nothing or playing on their phone, they're supposed to go through it. The little kid, a lot of what we're trying to do there is what the little kids do in a guided dynamic warm-up at our other pool where there is no equipment and they're just younger, more novice athletes, and so they don't need to be doing any of that loaded explosive work anyways. And so yeah, a lot of it's bear crawls and all the different things that you were talked about. But then when we get into the Dryland, I guess what we're talking with our coaches about is how to balance what they're actually doing then in the Dryland. Can you talk to like, are you putting an emphasis on, for example, doing like a band, high elbow catch pull to simulate a catch, or are you trying to stay away from that and actually go to doing, a row or something to work their back and rhomboids and everything to try to strengthen those muscles that we don't normally work in swimming? Does that make, I guess?
Yeah, no, I got what you're saying. I believe in on land making them better athletes and then in the water making them better swimmers, because we have a certain neuromuscular pattern that we use for our catch and our pull. And when we're in the water, that's when we're going to want that to be firing at its best. So if we do too much work on land resisted where it's mimicking that exact movement pattern, we can actually make our swimming worse from doing that. But we can make ourselves better athletes. We can get stronger in those movement patterns, and that better athleticism can then translate, like we talked about, better neuromuscular connection for making those technique changes and now using your increased strength to be stronger, faster, more durable. Does that help?
Yeah. So actually, like, can you go to a slide or two over?
Sure. Show me one.
This one right here. Go back one. So, like in terms of this list, are there certain areas that you like to focus on? Again, like personally, from all the videos and articles and stuff that I've read, it seems like, you don't want to, as you said, bombard them with the same thing over and over to where it's going to create injury. And so, we also do we call it shoulder stability. And so they get bands and they're supposed to go through shoulder exercises or prehab, I guess you could call it, twice a week. And nothing that they're doing in the prehab or shoulder stability is internally rotating, because that's all we ever do in swimming is internally rotate. And so everything is externally rotating and try to get their shoulders to come back. And so again, when we do Dryland too, for me, I guess, especially, I mean, a ton of it's leg, lower body focus, but then the upper body work, I would say, is heavily on their back. I guess, can you talk to maybe some of these areas that you specifically like to focus on maybe more so? And I get where you're saying that they want to be well-rounded and be able to do a little bit of everything, but
Sure.
again, just not that we're overwhelming them with those same internal rotating movements that they only do in the water.
Yeah. So actually, you reminded me of a recommendation I wanted to make. If there is one thing that I think would be really helpful for your programs to spend money on, it's a crossover symmetry system, or at least doing some research into that. It is a resisted things that you can do with band stretch cords, but it's a guided exercise system that essentially the kids would get if they were to go see a physical therapist. So all of their prehab kind of given to them already. So really good resource to use of just, here's the exercises, here's what we're going to do every single day. And it's a really good 2 to 3 minute prehab and muscular activation protocol. To go into your question a little bit more about prioritizing one over the other, my priority for shapes is definitely make sure they can make the shapes of a good squat position, make sure they can hinge correctly without tailbones tucking under or backs rounding. For training purposes, I like to program a 3-to-1 ratio in volume for pulling to pushing, because we're going to be doing a lot of internal rotating. We're going to be doing a lot more, or at least the movement patterns I see in the water, a lot more chest and shoulder dominant than they are back dominant. So balancing that out or trying to get those stronger, whatever we're doing on land, I like to do 3 times more pulling than pushing where appropriate. My priority in time actually comes more on the core and coordination stuff. And then we do some basic strengthening and motor control for the lunging, the squatting, and the push-up work, just because I'm trying to develop those really good habits now so that when they get older in our program, they're able to do those things without competition.
Perfect.
And then do you have a sheet that the kids look at, or do you I guess how do you present what they're doing, and what is your cycle of changing what they're doing? Is it, every other day where you're doing upper body or lower body or pushing or pulling, or do you kind of stick with one thing for 2, 3, 4 weeks and then switch? Like what is kind of the plan that you guys are on through the season?
So I have a Excel sheet that I've used and modeled after the GAIN program that they use for their 8 and under, 10, 9, 10, and 11, 12s, and kind of progressing through different phases of teaching specific elements, blending those elements together. Kind of starts with basic coordination development. We do a little bit of elements of strength. We'll pick one lower body or upper body to work on that day. After that, we'll do some core specific work. And then there's usually some elements now that we're starting to add in of power and explosivity. So it starts really, really simple and make sure that we can all do 1 or 2 simple things really, really well. And then we start to progress by adding more elements or blending 2 or 3 elements together. So I'll give you an example. I have a yoga series that the kids are now doing as a full 8 movement flow that we started with just doing 2 or 3 positions over and over and over again. When I started teaching squats, we just did sitting to a step and doing that really, really slow with really good form. And now we're able to do squats at tempo, at parallel or a little bit below parallel with good control. When I was teaching push-ups, we worked on just being in a good, strong plank position and just lowering ourselves to the ground and then getting back into our starting position, not even really pushing up away from the ground. And now we're able to do multiple sets of full push-ups. So again, it's kind of starting with simple elements and then making it more complex. So, and to answer your question about how I present it, I verbally present. I don't have them have a sheet. I want them engaged and actively listening and watching. So I'll demonstrate. We'll talk about it because again, it'll be one or two simple concepts in the beginning. It's more about them listening and seeing, and then trying to copy, and then go from there.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Are we good to go? Perfect. Well, Travis, and thank you so much. This has been tremendous. And I guess I just really appreciate the opportunity. Like I said, we'll be posting this later this week. We'll get it up on our YouTube channel. And are you open to answering any questions? If anybody has anything.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions on programming examples, can want me to expand on any of the things we talked about today, I'm an open book. So yeah, send me an email, let me know.
Awesome. Travis, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you guys.
Very good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Travis.
You're welcome.